On November 1st, 1922, the Ottoman Empire, which had ruled for 6 centuries, controlled 3 continents, and commanded the loyalty of 30 million subjects, officially ceased to exist. The Sultan fled Constantinople on a British warship, carrying nothing but a suitcase and his wives. 600 years of empire, reduced to a refugee on a boat. The collapse seemed sudden. It wasn't. The signal had been flashing for decades. The currency had been debased, the debts had grown beyond repayment, the elite had been moving assets abroad, trust in the institutions had evaporated, and the population had convinced itself that the empire would endure because it had always endured. The signal appears before every collapse. It appeared before Rome, before the British Empire, before the Soviet Union, before 1929, before 2008. It's appearing right now. The signal doesn't tell you the exact day. It never has, but it has never been wrong about the outcome. Not once in recorded history. In this video, you'll learn to recognize the signal, the 5 symptoms that appear before every major collapse. You'll see it in ancient Rome, in 20th century empires, in modern America, because the signal is flashing now. All 5 symptoms, simultaneously. The only question is whether you'll see it before it's too late. The signal is not mysterious, it's not hidden in secret documents or locked away in classified archives. It's visible to anyone willing to look. The signal is simple. When a nation's debts grow faster than its productive capacity for a sustained period, collapse becomes inevitable. This is not theory, this is arithmetic. Debt is a claim on future production. When debts grow faster than production, eventually the claims exceed what can be produced. At that point, the system must reset, through default, debasement, or destruction. There are no other options. There never have been. The French learned this in 1795. The revolutionary government had issued paper currency called assignats to fund its wars and programs. The assignats were supposed to be backed by confiscated church lands. They weren't. The printing presses ran day and night. Within 5 years, the assignat had lost 99% of its value. Bread riots erupted in Paris. The middle class was annihilated. Napoleon rose from the chaos that followed. The Argentines learned it in 2001. Decades of borrowing had built debts that couldn't be repaid. When the crisis hit, the government froze bank accounts in what became known as the corralito. Citizens who had savings on Monday couldn't access them on Tuesday. The peso collapsed. The economy contracted 11% in a single year. 5 presidents cycled through in 2 weeks. The streets of Buenos Aires burned with protest. Different centuries, different continents, the same signal, the same outcome. But the signal isn't just debt. It manifests through 5 visible symptoms that appear together before every major collapse. Think of them as warning lights on a dashboard. One light might be a minor issue. All 5 lights flashing simultaneously means the engine is about to seize. Symptom 1. Currency debasement. Every collapsing empire debases its currency. Roman emperors clipped coins. Medieval kings reduced silver content. Modern governments print money electronically. The method changes with technology. The result doesn't. When money loses value, savings are destroyed and the social contract frays. Symptom 2. Wealth concentration. Before every collapse, wealth concentrates at extreme levels. The few capture almost everything. The middle class hollows out. The many are left with nothing to lose. This isn't about fairness or politics, it's about stability. Concentrated wealth means concentrated fragility. When the many have nothing, they have nothing to defend. Symptom 3. Institutional decay. Trust is the invisible infrastructure of civilization. When citizens stop believing in courts, in government, in media, in the basic fairness of the system, the infrastructure crumbles. Legitimacy cannot be printed or legislated. Once lost, it's almost impossible to restore. Symptom 4. Elite exodus. The wealthy see collapse coming first. They have better information. They have more options. When they start moving assets abroad, buying hard assets, obtaining second passports, they're voting with their feet. They're telling you what they see. Most people don't listen. Symptom 5. Collective denial. The final symptom is psychological. The population convinces itself that collapse is impossible, that this time is different, that the empire is eternal, that someone will fix it. This denial persists until the morning the ATMs don't work, until the currency won't buy bread, until the unthinkable becomes undeniable. These 5 symptoms have appeared together before every major collapse in recorded history. Not most collapses, every collapse. The signal doesn't predict exact timing. The French assignat collapsed in 5 years. Rome took 2 centuries. The timing varies based on circumstances, on policy responses, on random events that accelerate or delay the inevitable. But the direction never varies. When all 5 symptoms appear together, when the signal completes, collapse follows. The debate isn't whether, the debate is when. This is why the signal matters. It gives you warning. It gives you time. It tells you the direction of travel even when the timing remains uncertain. Those who see the signal can prepare. Those who dismiss it become victims. Let me show you the signal in action. Let's start where the pattern first became visible, in the eternal city that was eternal at all. The year was 201 AD. Emperor Caracalla stood in the imperial mint and made a decision that would echo through 17 centuries. He ordered the creation of a new coin, the Antoninianus. It was supposed to be worth 2 denarii, but it contained only 1.5 denarii worth of silver. A 25% devaluation hidden in plain sight. Caracalla needed money. The legions demanded payment. The borders demanded defense. The citizens demanded bread. The treasury was empty. The solution seemed elegant. Create money from nothing. It was the beginning of the end. The Roman denarius had been the world's reserve currency for 3 centuries. Under Augustus, it contained 95% pure silver. Merchants from Britain to India accepted it without question. The denarius wasn't just money, it was trust made tangible. It was Rome's promise, minted in metal. Caracalla's debasement began a spiral that couldn't be stopped. Each emperor faced the same pressures. Each emperor made the same choice. By the reign of Gallienus in 260 AD, the denarius contained only 5% silver. By Diocletian in 290 AD, it was bronze with a thin silver wash that rubbed off in your hands. The currency had lost 99% of its intrinsic value in 80 years. Symptom 1. Currency debasement. Check. But the monetary collapse was just one signal. The others were flashing simultaneously. Wealth had concentrated to grotesque levels. The latifundia, vast agricultural estates, had swallowed the small farms that once defined Roman society. A handful of senatorial families owned more land than entire provinces. The citizen farmers who had built the republic, who had filled the legions, who had voted and paid taxes. They had been replaced by slaves working fields they would never own. The middle class that had been Rome's foundation simply vanished. By the 3rd century, Roman society had become 2 classes, those who had everything and those who had nothing. The ladder between them had been pulled up. Symptom 2. Wealth concentration. Check. Trust in Roman institutions had collapsed entirely. The 3rd century saw over 50 emperors in 50 years, most murdered by their own soldiers. The Praetorian Guard, sworn to protect the emperor, became his greatest threat. In 193 AD, they literally auctioned the throne to the highest bidder. Didius Julianus paid 25,000 sesterces per soldier and became emperor. He lasted 9 weeks. Courts ruled for whoever paid most. Tax collection became organized extortion. Citizenship, once the most valuable status in the ancient world, became a burden. It meant you could be taxed and conscripted while receiving nothing in return. Symptom 3. Institutional decay. Check. The wealthy saw what was coming. They retreated from the cities to fortified rural estates. These villas became self-sufficient kingdoms, with their own workers, their own guards, their own food production. The rich weren't investing in Rome anymore. They were preparing for a world without Rome. They stopped maintaining urban infrastructure. They stopped funding public buildings. They stopped participating in civic life. They had already mentally seceded from the empire that had made them rich. Symptom 4. Elite exodus. Check. And through it all, the population believed Rome would endure. How could it not? Rome was civilization itself. It had existed for 1,000 years. The temples still stood. The roads still connected the empire. The legions still marched. In 410 AD, when Alaric's Visigoths sacked the city for the first time in 8 centuries, Saint Jerome wrote from Bethlehem, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken." The shock reverberated across the Mediterranean. The unthinkable had become real. Symptom 5, collective denial. Check all 5 symptoms, all flashing simultaneously, for generations. The signal had been visible for 200 years before the final collapse. 200 years of warning, 200 years of opportunity to change course. Rome didn't take it. Rome didn't fall in a day. It fell one debased coin at a time, one corrupt official at a time, one wealthy family retreating to the countryside at a time. The collapse was slow enough that each generation could pretend things were normal. Fast enough that by the time denial became impossible, preparation had become impossible too. This is what the signal teaches. The warning comes early. The collapse comes eventually, and the gap between warning and collapse is filled with denial. The Romans believed they were exceptional. They were wrong. The empires that followed believed the same thing. They were wrong too. 3 laboratories, 3 experiments, 3 identical results. The 20th century provided something historians rarely receive: controlled experiments in collapse. 3 different systems, 3 different ideologies, 3 different continents, 1 identical signal. Weimar Germany, 4 years from prosperity to ashes. January 1919, $1 bought 8.9 German marks, a comfortable exchange rate for a proud nation recovering from war. November 1923, $1 bought 4.2 trillion marks. The signal had been flashing since the Treaty of Versailles imposed unpayable reparations on Germany. The government faced a choice: tell the population the war had bankrupted them, or print money to delay the reckoning. They chose the printing press. They always do. The 5 symptoms appeared in sequence: currency debasement, marks printed in denominations of trillions, wealth concentration, those with hard assets survived while the middle class was annihilated in months, institutional collapse. The courts, the police, the basic functions of government disintegrated as salaries became worthless between paycheck and purchase. Elite exodus, anyone with connections moved wealth to Switzerland, to gold, to anything beyond the mark's reach. And collective denial, the belief that the government would stabilize the situation, that hyperinflation couldn't happen in a civilized nation, that Germany was exceptional. 4 years, from stable currency to burning banknotes for warmth because they were cheaper than firewood. The middle class that had built German culture, German industry, German science, destroyed in less time than a university degree takes to complete. The vacuum created by that destruction would be filled by something far worse: the British Empire, death by 1,000 cuts. Britain's signal flashed more slowly, a decline measured in decades rather than years. Before 1914, the pound sterling was the world's reserve currency. London was the center of global finance. The empire stretched across a quarter of the Earth's surface. Britain had ruled the waves for a century. Decline seemed unimaginable. The Great War changed everything. Britain borrowed massively to defeat Germany, from its own citizens, from its dominions, and crucially, from the United States. The empire that had been the world's creditor became a debtor. The signal began. The symptoms accumulated gradually. Currency debasement, through abandoning the gold standard in 1931. Wealth concentration, as the aristocracy clung to assets, while working class wages stagnated. Institutional decay, as the government proved incapable of addressing depression, unemployment, and the rising demands of the colonies. The elite exodus was subtle but unmistakable. British capital flowed to America throughout the 1930s and 1940s. The wealthy hedged their positions, maintaining assets on both sides of the Atlantic. They could read the signal even if they wouldn't speak of it publicly. The collective denial persisted until one moment of humiliation shattered it. November 1956, the Suez Crisis. Britain and France had invaded Egypt to retake the nationalized Suez Canal. The operation was militarily successful. Then the United States intervened. Not with soldiers, but with financial pressure. America threatened to crash the pound. Britain withdrew, humiliated, exposed. revealed as a power that could no longer act independently. The empire that had taken centuries to build unraveled within a generation. By 1970, it existed only in memory. The Soviet Union. 900 days. The Soviet collapse proved that the signal can stay muted for decades, then explode with terrifying speed. By the 1980s, all 5 symptoms were present but suppressed by totalitarian control. Currency debasement hidden behind controlled prices and a non-convertible ruble. Wealth concentration masked by ideology but real. The nomenclatura lived in a different world than ordinary citizens. Institutional decay camouflaged by propaganda, but visible to anyone who looked closely. Elite exodus impossible under travel restrictions, but the desire was evident in every defection. And collective denial, imposed by the state but also genuinely believed. The Soviet Union had nuclear weapons. It had satellites in space. It had survived Hitler. How could it possibly collapse? The Berlin Wall fell on November 9, 1989. The Soviet flag was lowered over the Kremlin on December 25, 1991. 900 days from superpower to historical footnote. The lesson: 3 collapses, 3 different systems, 3 different timelines. Weimar took 4 years, Britain took 40, the Soviets took 900 days once the trigger came. The timing varied enormously. The signal was identical, 5 symptoms, 1 outcome, every time. Lehman Brothers had survived the Civil War. It had survived 2 world wars. It had survived the Great Depression. For 158 years, the firm had endured every crisis America had faced. At 1:45 a.m. on September 15, 2008, it filed for bankruptcy. By sunrise, the global financial system had begun to freeze. The signal had been flashing for years. Almost everyone had ignored it. The mathematics were clear as early as 2004. Household debt was growing at 10% annually. The economy was growing at 3%. The gap widened every year. This was the signal. Debt outpacing productive capacity. Visible in public data. Published in government reports, available to anyone who looked. But looking meant accepting uncomfortable truths. So almost no one looked. The 5 symptoms were all present. Currency debasement had begun years earlier. After the dot-com collapse on September 11th, the Federal Reserve slashed interest rates to 1%, the lowest in a generation. Easy money flooded the system. Mortgages became available to anyone with a pulse. The money supply expanded relentlessly while productive capacity didn't. Wealth concentration accelerated throughout the 2000s. The gains from the housing boom flowed upward. Wall Street bonuses reached record levels, while median wages stagnated. The top 1% captured nearly all the economic growth of the decade. The middle class maintained its lifestyle through borrowing. Home equity loans, credit cards, second mortgages. They were consuming wealth they didn't have. They were borrowing their future to fund their present. Institutional decay was rampant but hidden behind respectable facades. The ratings agencies, Moody's, S&P, Fitch, blessed toxic mortgage securities with OLA ratings. They were paid by the banks creating the securities. The conflict of interest was obvious. No one in authority cared. The SEC had relaxed leverage limits for investment banks in 2004, allowing them to lever up 30-1. The regulators had been captured by the regulated. Elite exodus was visible to those who knew where to look. John Paulson, a hedge fund manager, spent 2006 and 2007 building a massive bet against subprime mortgages. He made $15 billion when the market collapsed, the largest single-year profit in hedge fund history. Goldman Sachs created mortgage securities, sold them to clients as safe investments, and secretly bet against them. When the collapse came, Goldman needed a government bailout. The executives who had positioned the firm kept their bonuses anyway. The smart money knew. They positioned accordingly. They didn't warn the public. They profited from the public's ignorance. Collective denial was universal. Housing prices always go up. The fundamentals are strong. Subprime is contained. The Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke spoke those exact words. Contained. In March 2007. 18 months later, the system nearly collapsed entirely. The signal was complete. All 5 symptoms flashing. And then Lehman fell. What followed was the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. The stock market fell 50%. 9 million Americans lost their jobs. 4 million families lost their homes to foreclosure. Retirement accounts were devastated. A generation's wealth evaporated in months. But here's what matters most. The signal wasn't resolved. It was suppressed. The Federal Reserve printed $4 trillion through quantitative easing, money created from nothing to buy the toxic assets that had caused the crisis. Interest rates were held at zero for 7 years. The government bailed out the banks, the insurers, the automakers. Anyone too big to fail was saved. The losses were socialized, the gains remained private. The debt that had caused the crisis didn't disappear. It was transferred from private balance sheets to the public balance sheet. The national debt doubled from 2008 to 2016. It has nearly doubled again since. The system that was supposed to reset, that needed to reset, was kept on life support. The bad debts weren't written off. They were absorbed by the government. The imbalances weren't corrected. They were extended. 2008 wasn't a reset. It was a postponement. And the price of postponement is that the next crisis is larger. The tools used to fight the last crisis are unavailable for the next one. The ammunition has been spent. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet went from $900 billion before 2008 to $4.5 trillion after. It now exceeds $7.5 trillion. Interest rates that could be cut from 5% to 0% in 2008 can only be cut from 4.5% today. The signal appeared in 2008. The signal was right. The collapse came. But instead of letting the signal complete its function, instead of allowing the reset that would clear the imbalances, the authorities suppressed it. They bought time with printed money. The time is running out. Something unprecedented is happening in America right now. The signal that appeared before Rome's fall, before Weimar's hyperinflation, before the Soviet dissolution, before 2008, that signal is flashing again. All 5 symptoms, simultaneously, for the first time since 1929. Let me show you. Symptom 1, currency debasement. Active. Between 2020 and 2024, the Federal Reserve created approximately $8 trillion. $8 trillion conjured from nothing. More money than the entire money supply that existed in 2008. The dollar has lost roughly 25% of its purchasing power since 2020 alone. Not over decades, in 4 years. The grocery bill that was $100 is now $125. Since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, the dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power. What cost $1 in 1913 costs $30 today. This is not inflation. This is not economic growth. This is policy, deliberate debasement to manage debts that cannot be repaid honestly. The symptom isn't approaching. It has arrived. Symptom 2, wealth concentration, extreme. The top 1% of Americans now own more wealth than the bottom 50% combined. 1% owns more than 50%. Read that again. The top 0.1%, 1 in 1,000 Americans, owns as much as the bottom 90%. 1,000 people control as much wealth as 900 million. These are not normal distributions. These are not the result of merit or hard work alone. These are the distributions that preceded the French Revolution, the distributions that preceded 1929, the distributions that precede social instability in every historical example we have. The middle-class share of national wealth has declined for 50 consecutive years. Real wages, adjusted for inflation, have barely moved since 1971. A worker today has roughly the same purchasing power as a worker 50 years ago. Meanwhile, housing costs have tripled relative to income. Healthcare has quintupled. Education has risen tenfold. The math doesn't work anymore. And when the math stops working, people notice. Eventually, they do more than notice. Symptom 3. Institutional decay. Critical trust in Congress stands at 8%. 8%. 92 Americans out of 100 do not trust their own legislature. This isn't partisan. Both parties are distrusted equally. Trust in the presidency fluctuates by party, but averages below 40%. Trust in the Supreme Court has collapsed following controversial decisions. Trust in media hovers around 20%. Trust in the Federal Reserve, the institution tasked with managing the currency, has cratered to historic lows. These aren't temporary dips caused by one scandal or one administration. These are structural failures of legitimacy. When 4 out of 5 citizens don't trust the institutions that govern them, those institutions govern only by inertia, only by habit. The legitimacy that took generations to build has been squandered in decades. The social fabric that holds a nation together is woven from trust. Thread by thread, that fabric is tearing. Symptom 4. Elite exodus. Accelerating Warren Buffett is sitting on $325 billion in cash, the largest cash position in Berkshire Hathaway's 60-year history. He's selling stocks, including Apple, his largest position, while finding nothing worth buying. The greatest long-term investor in history is heading for the exits. What does he see that others refuse to acknowledge? Bill Gates has become the largest private farmland owner in America, with over 270,000 acres. Jeff Bezos owns hundreds of thousands of acres. Ted Turner owns 2 million acres. The technology billionaires who built their fortunes in the digital world are buying the most analog asset imaginable: dirt. Land that produces food. Land that has value regardless of what happens to currencies or financial systems. Demand for second passports among ultra-high net worth Americans has surged 300% since 2020. Portugal's Golden Visa program was overwhelmed with American applicants before it closed. New Zealand property marketed as bolt holes for American billionaires has become a recognized asset class. Family offices report record allocations to cash, gold, and real assets. The private advisors who manage billionaire wealth are positioning for something they won't discuss publicly. Their actions speak clearly enough. The smart money sees the signal. They're acting on it, quietly, persistently, without announcement. Symptom 5. Collective denial. Universal. The dominant narrative insists everything is fine. Soft landing. The Federal Reserve will guide the economy to lower inflation without recession. The debt is manageable. The deficits will shrink somehow. AI will save us. Technology will generate so much growth that the debts won't matter. Productivity will surge. The old rules don't apply to us. This time is different. America has the reserve currency. America has the military. America is exceptional. These are the same words spoken before every collapse. The names change. The technologies change. The excuses change. The denial is identical. The signal complete 5 symptoms, all present, all flashing simultaneously. This is not pessimism. This is pattern recognition. The same pattern that appeared before Rome, before Weimar, before Britain, before the Soviets, before 2008. The signal has never failed to predict the outcome. Not once in 2,000 years of recorded history. The timing remains uncertain. Signals don't give dates. Rome took centuries. Weimar took 4 years. The Soviets took 900 days. But the direction has never varied. When all 5 symptoms appear together, collapse follows. The debate is not whether. The debate is when. The signal is flashing. Are you watching? Remember the Sultan. November 1922. 6 centuries of empire. 30 million subjects. 3 continents under Ottoman rule. And then a suitcase, a British warship, and exile. The collapse seemed sudden to those living through it. It wasn't. The signal had been flashing for decades. The currency had been debased. The debts had grown beyond repayment. The elite had been quietly moving assets abroad. Trust in the institutions had evaporated. And the population had convinced itself that the empire would endure because it had always endured. They were wrong. They were all wrong. Every empire in history that saw the signal and ignored it collapsed. Every currency that was debased to cover unpayable debts failed. Every population that believed they were the exception discovered they were the rule. This is not opinion. This is documentation. 2,000 years of recorded history, dozens of civilizations, dozens of currencies, dozens of populations who believed their situation was unique. The same signal, the same symptoms, the same denial, the same outcome. The Romans believed their empire was eternal. It had existed for 1,000 years. The roads connected 3 continents. The legions were invincible. How could Rome fall? It fell. The British believed their empire would endure forever. The sun never set on it. They ruled the waves. They had built the modern world. How could it end? It ended. The Soviets believed their system was permanent. They had nuclear weapons. They had satellites orbiting the Earth. They had defeated Hitler. How could they disappear? They disappeared in 900 days. Each civilization had its reasons for believing it was different. Each civilization had sophisticated arguments for why the signal didn't apply to them. Each civilization had experts who explained why collapse was impossible. Each civilization was wrong. And now the signal is flashing in America, all 5 symptoms, simultaneously, louder than at any point in living memory, more complete than at any time since the years before 1929. The question isn't whether the signal is real. The historical record answers that question definitively. The signal is real. It has predicted every major collapse in recorded history. The question isn't whether America is showing the symptoms. The data answers that question with brutal clarity. Currency debasement, documented in every inflation report, wealth concentration, measured in every Federal Reserve survey, institutional decay, visible in every trust poll, elite exodus, observable in every billionaire's portfolio allocation, collective denial, audible in every reassurance from every official source. The question is what you will do with this information. The choice. You have a choice that every person in every collapsing civilization has faced. You can dismiss the signal. You can tell yourself that America is different, that the reserve currency status protects you, that the military power shields you, that the technology will save you, that someone, the Fed, the government, some authority somewhere, will fix things before they break. This is what most people choose. It's comfortable. It requires no action. It requires no difficult conversations. It lets you continue as if tomorrow will look like today. It's also what people chose in Rome, in Weimar, in Britain, in the Soviet Union. In 2007, the people who chose denial became victims. Their savings were destroyed. Their retirements evaporated. Their certainties became ashes. They didn't see it coming because they refused to look. They had the same access to information. They made a different choice about what to do with it. Or you can accept what the signal is telling you. Not with panic. Panic is useless. Not with despair. Despair is surrender. The signal doesn't demand fear. It demands clear-eyed preparation for a transition that history says is coming. The people who saw the signal and prepared, they survived. They often thrived. They were on the right side of the wealth transfer that accompanies every collapse. In Weimar, those who held gold preserved their purchasing power while the mark became worthless. In the Soviet collapse, those who had positioned themselves correctly captured the assets of an empire at pennies on the dollar. In 2008, those who saw the signal, John Paulson, a handful of others, made fortunes, while the unprepared lost everything. The signal doesn't just predict destruction, it predicts transfer. Wealth doesn't disappear in a collapse, it moves. From those who didn't prepare to those who did, from those who trusted the system to those who understood it. The timeline problem. The signal doesn't give dates. This is its limitation and its challenge. Rome's signal flashed for 2 centuries before the final collapse. Weimar's for 4 years. The Soviet signal flashed for a decade before the 900-day disintegration. You could see the signal and be early. Being early feels like being wrong. You prepare for a crisis that doesn't arrive on schedule. You watch others prosper while you wait. You question your own judgment. Your friends question your sanity. This is why most people eventually abandon the signal. The wait is too long. The pressure is too great. The denial is too seductive. It's easier to believe than to prepare. But being early isn't being wrong. It's being early. The signal has preceded every major collapse in human history. The outcome has never varied. Only the timing. And there are reasons to believe the timing is accelerating. The debts are larger than at any point in American history. The tools to fight the crisis are more depleted than in 2008. The Fed has less room to cut rates. The government has less fiscal capacity. The credibility has been damaged by years of being wrong. The ammunition has been spent fighting the last crisis. The system that postponed the 2008 reckoning is running out of postponement options. You cannot suppress a signal forever. You can only delay its completion. The final question. When historians write about this era, and they will write about this era, they will record who saw the signal and who did not. They will note that the data was public, that the symptoms were measurable, that the patterns were documented in history books available to anyone, that anyone who wanted to see could see. And they will ask the same question we ask about the Romans, the British, the Soviets, the investors of 2007. How could they not see what was coming? How could they ignore what was so obvious in hindsight? The answer is always the same. Denial. The most powerful force in human psychology. The force that lets civilizations walk toward cliffs while discussing the beautiful view. The signal is flashing. 5 symptoms, all present. The same configuration that has preceded every major collapse in recorded history. The signal doesn't care about your politics. It doesn't care about your hopes. It doesn't care about your retirement plans. It doesn't care about your denial. It simply tells the truth about what comes next. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire learned this lesson on a British warship. Watching his empire disappear behind him, what will you learn? And when will you learn it? The signal is speaking. The only question that matters now. Are you listening?